So looking at a calendar just a couple of days ago, I mentally kind of calculated in my head this might be the one and only talk that I give while I'm here for this visit, and talking to a few people about things that were interesting me, and questions I've been getting since I've been gone. It's kind of brought up kind of two subjects I might venture into. One is what I'll be doing after I leave here, a little bit. Figured this would be a great time to talk about it because I won't probably have time to talk to everybody about it individually. But the other is the effects of the fire, how that has affected people's practice, and I've got my own story about that. So somehow I might try to weave both of these into the reflection this evening. I think people can relate to this first kind of image I get, just with the amount of really hard work that's been done over the last 2 months. It's quite visible to me, just the amount of care and attention's been put into all the work, especially around the fire clearance, around the cabins and the property, and protecting the monastery and doing work that we needed to do. And I can tell it's been a lot of hard work, and still a lot of hard work to do. It is compliments to the community. And the image I get is for the last 6 months I've been traveling, most of it at the Pacific Hermitage in White Salmon, Washington, but also visited a Christian monastery in Minnesota, and then visited Arrow River for a week up in Ontario, Canada, and then drove to Tisarana and spent about a week there, and then spent about 3 weeks in New Hampshire, most of it Temple Monastery. And the image I get is when I came back here, it was like putting on a glove that fit perfectly. Sort of like having your own work glove that you use every day. Just you put them on and they feel comfortable, and you know that they're not filled with poison oak or dirty, but they just feel comfortable on you. And then one day you can't find your gloves and you got to go borrow a pair from the work stores, and you just put them on and they're tight, or they're not your gloves. And we know how gloves work. The new gloves that you pulled out, they serve the function, but there's just not that comfort level. And it was interesting as I was traveling this last 6 months. I did notice it. As you go and you just see, everybody has their own particular way of doing things in monasteries. When the breakfast is served, how it's served, what they serve. But the thing I noticed immediately when I came here was the chanting. As soon as we did the meal chanting the very first day, I was like, oh, that's the way it's supposed to be done. It's the right pace, it's the right speed, it's the right volume. Like everybody else did the exact same chanting we did, but it was different. And there was this comfort of doing it here. And the whole time I was traveling, I knew that there was nothing wrong with the way the other communities were doing it. There wasn't even any judgment or criticism. But when I came back here, just that sense of ease, that sense of comfort was quite refreshing. And in many things that we do here, I think having this experience of the last 6 months of traveling, basically after I've spent most of my last 20 years living here, but in particular the last, I think it's about 7 years in a row I've lived here, and just getting a sense of the monastic training of how we live, the core watts that we've set up, the monastic etiquette, how we choose to live together and the training we receive. It really creates this strong foundation for how we experience the world, how we interact with each other. And you probably don't even notice it as it's happening now, but this you actually are laying. If you're training here, if you started as an anagarika and you do your training through your fifth vasa, it's like, the way we're training it, it's laying your foundation for kind of how you will view monasticism and other communities for the rest of your life. And that's not in a negative way. It's like judging isn't always a negative thing, but it will be your core, your foundation. And this kind of reminds me of, just as I was leaving the Pacific Hermitage, I stayed with Sakula and Alistair at the Portland Friends of the Dhamma. And I was asking Alistair what he was up to in terms of work, and he was saying that one of the, I don't know if it's a trend or how he's teaching, but he said one of the analogies or images he's been using in his seminars is that, he said, at any time that you take on a new endeavor, there's always this sort of roller coaster. There's always a high and then a low, and hopefully there's just a constant up and down. And I could immediately see, sense that with the 20 years I've been a monastic. There's been lots of ups and downs, and some of them dramatically up, and some of them dramatically down. And but what Alistair pointed out is this kind of new theory that they're teaching people is that when you take anything new on a Garka training or being a monk or starting a new business, there's going to be that euphoria at the beginning, the excitement, the energy to get going. But then there's going to be a downward trend, and there's going to be a maybe even accelerating downward trend. And typically what happens in life is we all have our defense mechanisms, and it's either to self-criticism, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, or the way I look at it is everybody else is wrong. You got to change everybody else, make it right, figure out what the problem is. There's some inherent problem in the system maybe, and we've got to figure that out and fix everybody else, or just get negative. And so we all have our strategies, but Alistair was pointing out is that just pointing out this fact to people that this is inevitable. There's going to be a high and there's going to be a low, and not to resist that low, not to fight it, to blame people or blame yourself, but just to say, oh, this is natural. And he said it's actually almost to the extent it's like training people to see that this downward slope is so natural that what you should do is when you start to notice the downward trend, you should make it go down as fast as you possibly can, and then ride the momentum up on the other side of the roller coaster so you can get back to the high quickly. And obviously not every analogy is perfect, because you can, as I pointed out to him, sometimes you get the momentum going too fast for the downward slope, and you'll just end up in a crash at the bottom and not able to go on. But I did like the analogy in general, though. It's like, yeah, if you know that it's natural, then we don't have to resist that downward trend, and just to realize that it's part of life, and then to learn to have compassion for ourselves, or to have compassion for the other people or the situations, and just have that knowledge that things will change, everything's impermanent. And so, if we do go through the low and we get a high, then not to be expecting that high is going to last forever either, that's also impermanent and changing, and it's going to go the other direction again. For some reason I was telling Anagarika Jordan at the tea time tonight that I think actually the absolute low for me living here was, I won't get into the details, or even who it was about, but there was an incident one night right before evening puja where a decision was announced to the community that totally went against sort of like everything the community had been planning, sort of organizing and sort of trying to get implemented for most of the year. And this was announced that it was going to happen sort of 1 minute before evening puja, and I was furious. And I had actually already determined that I was going to, as soon as the puja was over, I was going to take my alms bowl and I was leaving the monastery. And I was 100% convinced that was going to happen. And we came in, did the chanting, did the meditation, And literally, as soon as we finished the Arahang Sama Sambuddho and bowed to Ajahn Pasano, everybody stood up, and I was just ready to head towards the door. And Ajahn Achalo was living here at the time, and he was sitting right in front of me in line. He was only Tan Achalo at the time, but sitting in front of me, and he just yells out, "We need to have a meeting." And so everybody kind of gathered, and we had like a 3-hour sort of spontaneous heart meeting about whatever this issue was, and so that cleared the air for me, and I was able to stay. But I look back at that, and that was the absolute low period for me in the monastic life. It was probably 1 year as a monk at that point. And later I asked Ajahn Achalo, I said, why did you call it that meeting? Because I hadn't said anything to anybody that I was heading out the door. And so he was sitting in front of me, and he said, well, about halfway through the sit, he said, I realized I was getting a sunburn from in the back. There was something really red hot behind me, burning me, and I knew something was going up, so something was going down. So I have Ajahn Achalo to thank for that. But on the other extreme, I think the extreme high for me so far has been just how the community responded during the fire. Literally from the moment Jotipalo discovered the fire, and what I heard, how he responded, and the effort he put in to let everybody know, to just how every single person responded. When I left here, and a lot of people were interested in knowing about the events, and what I kept telling everybody over and over again was, especially that week we were refugees and living in the city of 10,000 Buddhas, and even when we came back, I kept telling people is for that period of time I really saw the potential for humanity. I really saw all of us sort of setting down sort of our petty differences and really bending over backwards to cooperate, and not that we don't, not that we're I think in terms of worldly communities, we're probably way, way, way off the scale in the terms of how to perform anyway. But that week was just exceptional, and so just for that week, I really feel like at one level that's it's going to be hard to top that. I think in terms of a peak experience for Abhayagiri, it's going to be up there. But as I was thinking that this evening, I was just thinking, actually in this next couple of weeks, when we got Lumpur Liam and Lumpur Jundi and Ajahn Jayasaro and Ajahn Viradamo and Ajahn Kongret and all these really senior monks coming, and a lot of the monks who have spent a lot of time here, contributed in great ways, like Ajahn Achalo is coming back because he was the one that oversaw the carving of this Buddha image. Took quite a long time, three efforts to get it done, but he oversaw all of that. And say Ajahn Kongret was here in the early days for a lot of the early parts, and Ajahn Siddhanta spent a significant amount of time here. So quite a few monks are coming back, and it has the potential. Again, it's sort of like this, just at the opposite extreme. Like if we're heading downward on the roller coaster, to not resist that, not to fight it. Actually, this potential for the good that can come out of this gathering. If we kind of get out of the way and just allow it to happen, because I know sometimes when we have huge crowds, it can be kind of taxing on a community. We're going to be asked to do things that we're not necessarily comfortable with, or just a lot more social engagement. But if we just see it as, okay, this is necessary, it's a short period of time, how can I help to make it fun? It has the potential to be, back-to-back sort of highs, in the history of the monastery. And I think, again, just sort of knowing that that's potential, that's enough. And was it yesterday morning, Ajahn Sek gave a really good morning reflection about how we can sort of set our attitude towards when the senior monks are visiting. And he told us, we have the training, we have the skills. We don't need to be afraid of it, because sometimes you can be intimidated by big gatherings. But I think we're ready. So I'm really looking forward to this period of time. Yeah, since I've been back, I haven't had a chance to talk to everybody, but just a few people I've talked to. My questions have been, like, how did the fire affect you? And especially with the winter retreat and just practice in general. And it's interesting to me that the responses have been completely across the board to, it didn't affect me very much at all. It's like I'm pretty new to the community, didn't have much attachment, or, obviously it was a scary event, but yeah, it didn't seem to have much effect. To some people that were, really clearly seeing how, everything's impermanent, and clearly seeing maybe attachments that they had to the way a community runs or the way a community's built, and realizing that could instantly be taken away from them. Literally, like, this whole monastery could have gone up in less than an hour if the telephone pole that fell had been a half mile further up the road. There's a good chance all of us would be dead, actually. I don't think we could have gotten everybody out in that the amount of time that it sounds like. But like Dee and Sandra, where they explained at their house, we didn't have cars at our kutis. It could have been very different. So some people clearly saw that things were, it deepened their practice in a way, and then there were certain people that kind of expressed things of, like, maybe it was even too frightening to look at. They still haven't really kind of opened up to it yet. Some of the events, and everybody's reaction and how they responded is perfectly natural, and we all deal with things at our own pace. Kind of not even related to it, but it is, I think, at some level. Well, I'll tell that story later. But for me personally, it's like, not ashamed to say, but I think I've cried more in the last 8 months than I have in my entire life, and I don't know exactly why it is, and I'm not even worried, because it actually feels quite good, and it's an exaggeration to say I've cried more than I have my entire life, but definitely this last year, I've cried more this last 8 months than I have in any year, by a great margin. And mostly it's coming from stories of generosity, or just seeing people doing great things. And like when I was at the White Salmon at the Pacific Hermitage, somebody who comes quite frequently to the monastery was telling me about a family member who was being bullied in school. And of course that just brought up a lot of sadness, and talking to her about that. And then I was mentioning it to somebody else on our alms round who's a school teacher, and they recommended I read this book called Wonder, about kind of written for kind of like junior high school kind of level reading. But it's just a totally amazing story. I won't get into it too much, but the first half of the book is written from the little boy who's going through a difficult situation and is kind of bullied at times. And the second half of the book, though, is from everybody else's perspective in his life. And it's really heart-opening, the sort of heart-rendering, hearing other people's perspective on the same issue. And yeah, I think I cried on just about every single page reading that book. But so for me, this year's has really been kind of the way I look at it. And I know it's not 100% accurate, but I was thinking recently about, I'd heard the story that Lumpur Sumedho, I don't know if it's true, and I hope it is, but I like telling it anyway. But I heard the story that he, one year for the winter retreat at Amravati, used neutral feeling as the teaching for the entire 3 months. Just talked about neutral feeling, the sort of the importance of that. And when I hear that, just as a potential for exploration, I just realize for myself, it's like I'm always looking for pain. It's looking for pain and looking for ways to avoid it. Like I was telling Ajahn Jotipalo recently that I just kind of had this realization that it's not all the time, but a lot of my meditation would be sitting down and doing body scanning, or even with breath awareness. It's really trying to scan my body and see where things are uncomfortable, and then trying to adjust them so I can be comfortable. And usually not to very good success, but there's often days when there isn't any pain, and then meditations are different. But oftentimes when there is pain, there's a lot of resistance, and that feels like what was happening in my meditation a lot was just resistance. And then if you're cultivating that, then there's not a whole love for meditation. There's not a great want to go into that if you're just resisting the whole time. And so just something about this fire, though, made me start looking at neutral feeling. And I think partly it's like I wasn't so much afraid of the fear, or afraid of pain, because one thing I was, like a pain in the back, or a pain in the knee, or tightness in the shoulder, that's nothing compared to all the animals that lost their lives, the families that lost loved ones. I think 12 people died in this fire just in Redwood Valley, and just the emotional pain of losing all of your possessions. And when I sat down and started obsessing about my little knee pain, it just felt trivial, and so I just didn't even want to go there. And so the natural conclusion was just to go to just a neutral feeling. And I think I always had that in the back of my mind, this teaching of Lumpur Sumedho of going to neutral feeling. And oddly, what happened is that as I got more and more comfortable, more and more at ease with just going into looking for neutral feeling, like I could be aware that, there's a physical sensation in the back or the knee, or I could be aware that there was happiness, or I was energized from doing the chanting, or whatever. I could see both the pleasure and the pain, but the focus became on just neutral feeling. But what happened was, as a result of that, probably just because of the lack of fear, it seemed like both of the extremes of happiness and pain expanded. So it's like before, I'd actually kind of think like my life was like 5% of it was pleasure, 5% of it was pain, but really 90% of life is kind of neutral feeling. And I don't think that those percentages are accurate, but that's kind of the perception I had about life. And then, but what happened was, as I got more and more comfortable with neutral feeling, it's like maybe that became 60% instead of 90, and then the other extremes were like 20 and 20. So really opening a lot more to seeing joy, seeing other people's happinesses, and of course when you see that, you want to support that, you want to take joy in that, and then also seeing more suffering, seeing where people really are in pain, where they really are needing help, and opening up to that, feeling more compassion and wholesome feelings in that way. And so it's been a very impactful 8 months, just on the sense of the fire. And I guess just to encourage, I'm just saying this just to kind of encourage people to not be afraid of sort of opening up to and exploring. Because I remember one of the very first Dhamma talks, morning reflections Ajahn Jotipalo gave when we came back, was he really encouraged us, don't let this fire, fade back into the memory. Don't let it be just another day, but learn from it. Because I think he also realized that it does have the potential to be, one of the, great teaching events for us in our lives. I just wanted to maybe end with just, kind of talking just a little bit about, as I mentioned, this might be the last talk I give for a while. And so, I'll probably be leaving July 1st, and I have a bit still travels left this summer. I'm going to be sort of initially, after a little bit of travel, ending up in Minnesota, and just being on retreat for a while at a friend's cabin. And then in August, I'll be going to Massachusetts to do an icon painting retreat. And there's a school here in the United States that I really like the particular style of painting they do. And so someone's very generously sponsored me to go, and so I'll be going to do that. And that'll be for about 2 weeks in August. And then at the end of August, I'll be starting. I'm actually going to be a fellow, Ajahn Jotipalo, the Jolly Good Fellow. Who'll be a fellow at this place called the Collegeville Institute. And what they do is it's part of a Benedictine monastery, Benedictine university, a small liberal arts college in the central part of Minnesota, where there's a third entity to the monastery and the college, and it's called the Collegeville Institute. And it's the funny story about it is this monk, Father Killian, founded the institute, and the reason he says he founded it was about 60 years ago. They were the professors, the faculty at the college were debating if they should introduce Protestant theology into the Catholic college curriculum. And he argued they shouldn't because they didn't have enough time even for the Catholic theology. And so, but the faculty took a vote and they decided they would. And so, as a result, they sent him to Germany to get his PhD in Lutheran studies. And then when he came back, his proposal was to start this ecumenical sort of research facility. And what they do is every year they bring in 10 scholars for a school year. And some people will be there for just a month, and some people will be there for a semester, and I'll be there for the entire academic school year. So about 9 months. And but people are there basically doing their own projects. I think once a week we'll have a seminar where we get together and discuss each other's work and give feedback. And but the rest of the time is very unstructured, and they do try to do several things to create community. And so I'll be living there, and it's about a 15-20 minute walk on flat land from the place where I'll be living. It's about 20-minute walk away from the monastery, and have my own apartment, completely separate from all the other units, and I'll be arranging to have my meal at the monastery. They don't eat until about 12:30, so I'll be eating alone. Arrange it so I'll be able to have my own room to eat out of my alms bowl. Sort of try to keep the standards that we do here. Either one of the community members or the kitchen staff was offered to go through the food line with me and put food into my alms bowl. So I really want to, kind of keep the standards we have here, and set that as even example for them to see. Have that opportunity for generosity and to learn about the way that we practice as well. Then it's really ideal because I think about half the time I'm there will be actually like studying, reading about Christian icons, and really trying to understand that tradition at a level of like how they use it spiritually, how they actually use it as a way of for the icon painter, they actually use it as prayer, which I can see very closely as meditation. And so I want to kind of understand that. But there's also a way of viewing icons, which I've talked about before, that it's they're actually to be viewed as in prayer as well. And so there's particular techniques and styles that they paint that facilitate that. And so I really want to understand that at a deeper level, because I think in the future what I want to do is to spend a lot of time sort of contemplating Buddhist suttas and stories and figuring out ways of actually doing kind of a new style of Christian icons, but doing Buddhist icons. And this asking those questions, contemplating those things, really I see lights up a part of my mind that doesn't get lit up at other times doing other activities. And so far I've always discovered that when when I am doing these kinds of activities, the icon painting or learning about it or contemplating the suttas in that way, that for one thing is it's fun and quite enjoyable when I feel like the mind is lit up like that, but it also has benefits later. So for meditations usually are much more enjoyable, and I look forward to them. So I'm trying to, just deepen that as a practice. Initially, what I had thought of doing was to go beyond retreat for a year. I was looking at some place like Birken Monastery or Arrow River, and be on retreat for a year, doing half the time sitting, walking, formal meditation, but half the time doing icon painting. And then at the end of that period, I was going to evaluate it and see if there were things that I didn't understand, questions I still had, difficulties. And I was thinking of looking for some sort of kind of educational program that might aid in that, and then do that for a while, and then go back to Beyond Retreat and see what I learned from that. But I mentioned to a good friend of mine, Father William Scudleric. He's at this place in Collegeville. He's at St. John's Abbey. And I just sort of mentioned I was looking for something like that. And he said, oh, well, we've got this institute called the Collegeville Institute. And so I did some research about it. And you had to fill out the application a year in advance. And so I got the dates mixed up. And so I started filling out the application and realized that it was actually a year too early to be filling out the application. But Father William and I had already sort of written the proposal. It's a couple-page essay you have to write, and I'd already kind of written it. But I also noticed to actually do this program, there's some expenses involved, and so I was going to need a fellowship to do it. And so they had 3 fellowships that they offered, and two of them I didn't think I'd be able to apply for. So I was asking my friend Father William, I said, is it the Killian Fellowship that I'll need to apply for? And he said, yeah, that's the one. He said, but you'll find it interesting. I had breakfast with Father Killian this morning, and I told him about your proposal. And again, he's the one that started the institute. And so he said, well, I'm the one who awards the fellowship. So, and I like this proposal, so I hope he applies. And so he's 96, and so I figured I better not wait till he's 97. So I decided to go ahead and apply for the application now. And fortunately, I was awarded it, and so that'll start in September, and say last through the end of April. And so that's kind of just a quick rundown of what I anticipate I'll be doing. And then after that, again, we'll still be looking for probably retreat opportunities for a while. And but it's one of the rare occasions in my life where I'm actually not trying to plan too much about my future. You can say that year at Collegeville's pretty much determined. Things can always change. But after that, I really have absolutely no idea. I just have a suspicion that being there for a year and meeting new people and even like what I'm going to be learning, I just have no idea where that's going to take me or what I'll get interested in. Like just being at the Pacific Hermitage this winter, Ajahn Siddhanta was extremely supportive of what I was doing, and he's an artist, and so I think he could see the sort of the benefits I was receiving and really encouraging me. But he gave me the idea of doing it's called triptychs, where it's actually like it's 3 panels. So you have one large panel, which would usually be of like Christ or Mary, and then you have 2 side panels, which are half size, and so you can close them, and it creates this really nice protective box for carrying the icons around. And we were looking at some images of them, and they really intrigued me, and so that's where I've been leaning more towards recently, is thinking of images that would fit into triptychs and making them. And but while I was at St. John's, my contact, Father William, was just giving me a tour of the monasteries. And there's actually 2 monasteries in 2 towns right next to each other, and you can take a school bus between the 2. And so we went over to where the nunnery is, and then they had a show there on needlepoint artwork that the nuns had had a school there for 100 years. And it was some of the most exquisite needlework I've ever seen. And but some of the images were of people, of like portraits, and they had one that was actually of a scene of like out in nature of trees, and just seeing the way that the artist, the needlepoint artist, had done trees with thread was just totally fascinating to me, and I could see the whole new ways of seeing the world and in creating. And this was just something that was just sort of, we didn't even anticipate it. It wasn't even on our radar. And so, I think there's going to be lots of opportunities for growth and opportunities for learning while I'm there that I have no idea what they're going to be. And the kind of final story I'll tell is well, several stories I can tell, but I just felt extremely welcome there. One story was we went into to meet the abbot, and I wanted to check in with him just to get his feedback on how I should participate in the monastery cloister area, because I'll be having my meal there, so I'm going to have access to it. And I was like, can I use the library there? Can I use it if it's 40 degrees below freezing outside? Can I use it to warm up in the recreation area? Or how should I be there? And Father William's question was, should Jotipalo, if he attends the masses, should he sit with the lay people or should he sit with the monks? And Father John Clausen, just his immediate reaction was, he's a monk, of course he should sit with the monks. And it's not 100% obvious that that's what you should do. And then he said, unless he doesn't want to. And I was like, well, why wouldn't I want to? He goes, I don't know. He goes, sometimes I don't want to sit with the monks. So I was like, yeah, okay, I feel pretty comfortable here. And then one of the other stories was, there are two of the monks that live there are icon painters. And right before I left the Pacific Hermitage, I had the opportunity to meet Lumpur Sumedho's sister, Virginia, who's I guess a quite accomplished and almost famous, if you can say an icon painter's famous, in the West Coast. And so we got to meet her, and I showed her some of my icons, and I was telling her about this program, and I asked her if there was any books that I should read while I'm there, take as study guides. And she said, well, there's one in particular. It's this Egon Sendler is the person's name, and the book's called The Icon. She said, that's the only one you need. And well, when I was at the icon, or at the St. John's, and was talking to one of the icon painters, I asked him if, how he got involved in icon painting, and he said, well, many years ago he was living in Europe, and he became the personal attendant of Egon Sendler. I'm like, okay, this is good. And then the other icon painter, he learned from the school that I'm going to be attending the workshop with this summer, and I'd already arranged for that to happen, so it was an interesting coincidence. And then I asked him what one of the main things he learned from that particular teacher of that school, because he learned directly from the founder of the school. And I just found out that the founder is the one who's going to be leading the workshop I'm at, so it's really quite a blessing. But I was expecting him to tell me about some technique or something. He said, oh, the thing I really learned the most from him was, he said, whatever you do, never criticize somebody else's icon, because that's their prayer. And I was like, oh, that's really beautiful. And I started thinking about that, just like in our monastery here, like the person who's the stores monk, or the person who's the guest monk, or the person who's the work monk. It's like that's their prayer. What they're doing here, that's their meditation. What the abbot does. What all of us do. That's where all of us are here trying to create, this icon of the monastery. And it's beautiful. And if we can learn to see it as that's our meditation, that's our prayer, that's what we're trying to develop within ourselves. and where we're trying to give back to the world. And that's worthy of supporting, even if someone's struggling, on that downward slope, seeing that, okay, it's not always all uphill. It's not always brighter and better. Sometimes it does get worse. But seeing is that's their prayer. I think that's a good place to end, so I'll leave it for your contemplation.
From the